Psycho-Pass is another stab at a utopian dystopia from the much-acclaimed Gen Urobuchi, the man behind Maho Shoujo Madoka Magica and Fate Zero, about a system that separates mentally healthy citizens from so-called latent criminals just by scanning their brains. The pilot episode got me a little optimistic. It was dark and showed promise. I mean, who doesn't like to see someone emulsified, leaving only their arm behind, and a fucking sweet shower of gore, even though how the guns operate isn't very practical at all. But an anime can't be carried solely by being dark and edgy alone. Once you get past its mostly nice visuals and dark tone, problems start to bubble up, problems that simply can't be ignored. The civil systems more often show it to be flawed rather than it is to be an effective form of government and management of citizens, which hurt my ability to suspend my disbelief regarding how the system ever became the universally accepted source of absolute authority. This is further hurt when they finally reveal what the system even is to begin with. When the system that forms the basis of the pretense that this is a utopian, dystopian society is so fundamentally flawed and implausible, the entire basis of the show falls apart. And speaking of implausibility, there are a lot of things that are made to be the case just for plot convenience's sake. One example being some professor who can literally read your mind just by looking at your face. Seriously? I mean, I know it's possible to determine basic moods and emotions by reading facial expressions, but what he does is nothing short of ass-pull mind reading. But then they try to pass it off as him just being talented. You could completely chop off the first half of episodes, as they're completely pointless to the overall plot. It's not a slow start, they're completely fucking pointless. They're totally irrelevant to the overall plan of the villain, and he is the only thing connecting them. All they do is prove that the civil system sucks, and serve as an excuse for Urobuchi to be like, "Look guys, look how much I've read," with forced, pretentious as fuck quotes delivered by one-shot villains. And speaking of irrelevant episodes, there's a whole episode stuffed in out of nowhere that gives a backstory of a character who's been completely peripheral up to that point. So you think that she'd become relevant afterwards. Wrong. She stays just as irrelevant as she'd always been. Her role doesn't change at all. It didn't help you understand her motivations, or her actions, or why she does what she does. Her backstory didn't really shape her as a character at all. All it did was show how she became an enforcer. It's like how 95% of Naruto characters just have a sad backstory and that's all there is to them. Now that I'm on the subject of characters, Makishima, the main villain, basically facilitates a bunch of smaller crimes committed by other side villains which, like I said, are ultimately pointless in the general scheme of things. And then, when he sets some new scheme in motion, they're suddenly like, "No, it's time for his endgame." And I'm just sitting there thinking, what game? There was a game? If you think it was foreshadowed well, you weren't watching the show. Like I said, there are a lot of scenes with forced, pretentious as fuck quotes. It's like all of these characters are well read in philosophy. Entire conversations are built around philosophical and moral issues, but fueled only by the character's abilities to quote particular well-known authors or philosophical thinkers. In fact, the only purpose these conversations seem to have is for Urobuchi to show off how educated he thinks he is. These quotings are so pretentious it's painful to watch. It wouldn't be that bad if they just tossed in a quote and then moved on. But nope, the conversation has to come to a screeching halt just to point out how smart the quote is. It usually goes a little something like this. Two characters, one of which is usually Makishima, are randomly talking alone in a room with no real context leading into the scene. One of them pulls some quote out of their ass that might not even be relevant to what they were talking about to begin with. One of the characters then says something like, insert name of person they quoted here, And as if naming the source of the quote wasn't stupid enough, they then for some reason feel the need to forcibly explain why that quote is relevant to matters at hand. They have to explain to you as a stupid and uneducated viewer you are that it is, in fact, super deep. If someone caught the reference, great for them, but you shouldn't explicitly explain who or what you're referencing. And if the quote actually meshes with the scene, it doesn't matter if they know who you're quoting, it'll sound intelligent all the same. It's kind of like how needing to explain a joke after the fact kills its chances of being funny. It kills any potential impact. Look, we said something smart, we quoted it from someone who's smart, and here's why it's smart. Also, just the fact that you quoted something smart doesn't mean you actually understand the context surrounding the quote itself. It's like Urobuchi can't give the characters thoughts and ideals of their own. Their stances on particular subjects are all determined by which particular philosophers they fancy. He couldn't just supplement them with highly regarded philosophers. Nope. Even characters that seem to have their own identity bust out lines from their handy-dandy quote book when you'd least expect them to. Makishima even pulls a random Bible verse out of nowhere. This really has no point at all, and no context or build-up for it. He's just sitting alone in a room and reads a Bible verse aloud just because. Okay. cool. Just because it had one particular word in it doesn't make it automatically applicable to the current situation. He quoted things so often that I was surprised when he could spit out half a dozen lines without pretentiously tossing in a random quote in there. And don't even get me started on the random contextless, philosophical, and existential waxing monologues that get stuffed in there. Thankfully though, it's not all like this. Akane is a solid female lead who graduates from sheer naivete into a much stronger and grounded individual with strong willpower. She's one of the characters who actually has thoughts all of her own, and doesn't get her notions from a quote book. In fact, she was probably the most developed one, period. Kogami is a moderately cool male lead with a troubled past, and a passable amount of depth to his character. One of the better character points in the series, though, the relationship between Ginoza and Masaoka, is unfortunately sidelined for much of the show, when this is easily one of the better written aspects contained therein. I really liked how Ginoza's character turned out. He was probably the second best character. But as for the show as a whole, the ending left much to be desired. Hint, that means I fucking hated it. It was totally unfulfilling, and made all the show's events feel completely and utterly inconsequential, including everything Makishima did. His goal didn't even stay the same. The first one was a feint for the second one thrown in at the end to fill more episodes. The show was story-driven, but the only thing that actually changed by the end was some of the characters. And then you have the minor miscellaneous things I don't even care to mention. The voice acting was good, but nothing really struck me as outstanding. If anything, I guess Makishima's Seiyu put on a good show, though he was kind of limited by the character he played. He probably would have been able to show off much more if his character was less calm and more eccentric. Kana Hanazawa puts on a good performance, though didn't really do anything to make Akane stand out from the other characters she's acted similarly. The music didn't stand out a whole lot, but when it did, it was excellent. I was actually expecting more from the visuals with this coming from Production IG. Guilty Crown looked better than Psycho-Pass, but then Psycho-Pass didn't have such a massive deficit of actual quality to make up for. The better scenes are mostly the vividly lit cityscape at night, but there are times of outright laziness and loss of quality. One episode of which the director even apologized for because it was so bad. What happened, Uro Butcher? He's running out of ideas and has to force depth and edginess in unnatural and cringeworthy ways. Oh, I'm comparing my society to Orwell's 1984. That means I'm learned, right? Fucking brilliant! 5 points for me. I can't say I wasn't entertained by it though. Watching people get blown into goo by Dominators got me all excited. That was all that really got me engaged though, which is sad considering how much of a value I placed on good writing. I only ever felt anything like twice throughout the course of the entire show, maybe even less than that. My final verdict is a 5 out of 10. Psycho-Pass is average. I really can't justify giving it anything higher than that. It barely saves itself from mediocrity with a few solid scenes of characterization to rescue the character department, and by not completely failing at presenting some of its themes, though the unbearable ham-fistedness by which many are forced upon you, and how some subjects are merely grazed over, come damn close to utterly foiling everything it tried to represent. All in all though, Psycho-Pass was disappointing, as I hoped to see something good from Gen Urobuchi again. I mean, I wasn't expecting Madoka Magica tier, because that'd be completely unreasonable. Maybe something more like Phantom Requiem for the Phantom. But Phantom totally shits on this in the writing department. The characters, the drama, the story, the psychology, and the themes are all much stronger, better developed, and not nearly as forced. Is Urobuchi getting worse at writing? The first episode was an explosive start, but then again, that's how Production IG anime tends to go. It quickly unraveled into a pointless filler fest doused in pretentiousness that ultimately didn't build up to anything important at all, and squandered some of its better opportunities of characterization and development, in favor of forcing quotes down your throat. God damn it! Just goes to show that just because a certain person is on the staff doesn't mean it's going to turn out great. Psycho-Pass definitely wasn't a show I expected to see being showered in 8, 9, and 10 out of 10 reviews. And yet, that's exactly what's happening. Brilliant? Hardly. This certainly isn't an anime I'm personally pining for a second season of. You hear me? Your sequel bait ain't capturing my attention. Take that shit and shove it right back up your ass.